The carriage stopped at the front of Ravenshold, and no one came out to meet me. I sat very still on the worn velvet seat and counted, because counting was a thing I could do that did not require anyone's permission. 1, 2, 3. The footman who had ridden with us from the church was looking at the ground as if the gravel had insulted him. The horses shifted in their traces. Somewhere inside the great house, a door opened and shut again without producing a person. A woman of 22 does not weep at her own wedding day. I had decided this in the chapel when the Duke had spoken his vows in a voice so steady it had sounded like an oath sworn at a graveside. And I had spoken mine in a voice I scarcely recognised as my own. I had not wept then. I would not weep now. The carriage door opened. My new husband held out his hand. "Your Grace," he said, and the title sat between us like a blade laid across a table. I took his hand. His fingers were cold through the kid of his glove. I let him hand me down, and I felt the great stone face of the house look at me and find me wanting before I had taken 3 steps across its gravel. They were still deciding how little to give her. I heard a woman murmur somewhere above us, by a window I could not see. "He has not told them. He has not told anyone." The Duke did not look up. He looked at me. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "Inside. Once. Then you may go where you choose." I did not understand. I walked with him. "My name is Linnea Whitcombe, and 3 weeks before I crossed the threshold of Ravenshold as its mistress, I had been the unpaid companion of my second cousin, Mrs. Pelham, in a damp set of rooms in Bath, where my chief duty had been to read aloud to her in the evenings, without coughing, and where my chief comfort had been the knowledge that no one could take less from me than had already been taken. My father had died when I was 12, my mother 2 years after. Mrs. Pelham had taken me in upon the precise condition that I never forget I had been taken in. I had not forgotten. I had not been permitted to. When the letter came from the Duke of Ravenshold offering for me, by means of an introduction so improbable I had read the page 3 times to be certain my eyes had not invented it, Mrs. Pelham had laughed. Not unkindly, with something like pity. She had said, "He will not want you when he sees you, Linnea. Men of his rank ask only to be quite sure of what they decline." I had been quite sure he would decline. He had not. He had come himself, the 2nd week, in a plain coat without the star at his breast, and he had sat in Mrs. Pelham's parlour and looked at me for one long, quiet minute that I felt down into the soles of my slippers, and he had said only, "Miss Whitcombe, if you will have me, the carriage is at the door. If you will not, I will not speak of it again." I had stood up. I had taken my bonnet from the peg. I had said, "I will have you, Your Grace." He had not smiled. He had nodded once, as a man nods at a thing settled, and he had handed me into the carriage, and he had not spoken to me for the entire journey north, except to ask if I was warm enough. I had been cold. I had said I was warm enough. He had taken off his own greatcoat and laid it across my knees, and we had ridden in silence for 200 miles, and at the end of those 200 miles, in a private chapel half a day's drive from Ravenshold, we had been married. He had not told me, in those 200 miles, what he wanted of me. He had not told me what he had been writing the night before our wedding, in the inn at the foot of the hill, by a tallow candle, with a witness on each side of him whose names I had not been given. He had told me nothing. And so, when I walked beside him into the great hall of Ravenshold on the day of my wedding, and heard a woman murmur from a high gallery that he has not told them, he has not told anyone, I understood for the first time that whatever he had not told me was a thing that mattered very much to other people in this house. The hall was vast and cold, and smelled of beeswax and old wood, and the faint metallic ghost of last night's fires. 3 women stood at the foot of the great staircase, as if they had been arranged there by a competent stage manager. A man in clerical black stood a pace behind them. A footman flanked each side. The eldest of the women was beautiful, in the way that some women remain beautiful long after kindness has left them. She wore lavender, half mourning for someone, though not, I thought, for me to ask whom. Her hair was the silver of polished pewter. Her eyes were the colour of a January sky. "Ravenshold," she said. "Not Alaric. Not my son. You are late." "We are not late, Aunt Cassandra," my husband said. His voice was very even. "I said before sunset. The sun is still above the trees." "You said before sunset." "And the sun," he said, "is still above the trees." She turned her January eyes upon me then, and I felt the temperature of the hall drop another 4 degrees. "And this," she said, "is your bride." "This is my wife," he corrected, very quietly. "The Duchess of Ravenshold." He did not let go of my hand. I had not realised until that moment that he had been holding it the entire walk across the gravel and up the great steps and through the door. I had not realised because his hand had been a thing I had stopped feeling several minutes ago, in the way a cold hand stops being felt when one is too occupied surviving to attend to it. Now, with her looking at me, his fingers closed once around mine. A pressure I felt more in my chest than in my hand. "Welcome to Ravenshold, Your Grace," said Lady Cassandra Thornbury, and curtsied exactly half an inch deeper than was insulting, and exactly half an inch shallower than was correct. I returned the curtsy at the precise depth her own had given me leave to. Something moved behind her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps. Or interest. I had not yet learned to tell which in this house. "Mrs. Hartwell will show you to your rooms," she said. "I have given you the east attic. It is small, that the air is good, and it will do until the master suite is properly prepared." The man in clerical black behind her cleared his throat. "Indeed," he said, in a voice like a damp cloth pressed to glass. "Indeed, Your Grace, we shall give you the smallest room, until you are quite settled in." I felt the hall hold its breath. I felt my husband, very still beside me, not look at the man in black at all. "The east attic," he said softly, as if he were repeating it back to her to be quite certain he had heard correctly. "For the Duchess of Ravenshold. Until the master suite is properly prepared, Ravenshold, as I said." She smiled. "You did, after all, not give us a great deal of notice." He looked at me then, just at me. The smallest, briefest look, and I saw something in it that I have thought about a great many times since. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something almost like amusement, very dry, very quiet. The look of a man watching another player make a move he had already prepared for. "The east attic will do excellently," he said pleasantly. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you would. My wife will rest before dinner. I will have words with the household in the gallery in 1 hour." The man in clerical black inclined his head. "As your Grace wishes." "Mr. Pell," said the Duke, without inflection, "I shall want a word with you at 5:30. In the library. Bring the ledgers." The clerical black went very still. "All of them, Your Grace." "All of them, Mr. Pell." The man bowed. I watched his bow, and I thought, with a small, startled clarity that I have learned to trust since, he is afraid of my husband. He is hiding it well, but he is afraid. The east attic was indeed small. A single high window, a narrow bed, a washstand, a writing desk no wider than my forearm. I sat down at the writing desk, and I put my hands flat on its wood, and I breathed. Mrs. Hartwell, who had walked me up the 7 flights and along 3 corridors and through one disused passage that smelled of mice, stood in the doorway with her hands folded over her apron, and she looked at me, the way a woman looks at a thing she has been told to dispose of and is now reconsidering. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was a Yorkshire voice, plain and unsoftened. "Forgive me, I was given this room 2 hours ago. The master suite has been ready a fortnight." I lifted my head. "A fortnight," I repeated. "Aired, dressed, the fires laid. His Grace had me see to it himself. He came up and walked through it the evening before we rode south to fetch you. He stood in the middle of the dressing room and he said, 'Pardon me, Your Grace,' he said, 'Make it warm. She has been cold a long while.'" I did not weep. I had decided this in the chapel. I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. The east attic is perfectly adequate." "Your Grace, it is perfectly adequate." I met her eyes. "For tonight, for as long as anyone wishes me to occupy it, I should not like the household disturbed on my account." She looked at me for a long moment. "You are not what they thought you would be, Your Grace," she said quietly, "if I may say so." I did not answer that. I did not know yet what to do with it. She curtsied, a deep, real curtsy this one, and she withdrew. I sat in the small room at the small desk, and I watched the light move very slowly across the wall, and I thought, he has not told them. He has not told anyone. What has he not told? And then I thought, he stood in a room and said, "Make it warm." She has been cold a long while. And I did weep then, just a little, once. And I wiped my face and I stood up. The library at Ravenshold smelled of leather and old smoke. I had not been invited to it. I went anyway. I had been raised by a clergyman father who had taught me, before he died, that a woman who waits to be invited into rooms in her own house will spend her life in corridors. I went down the back stairs in my plain grey travelling gown because I had not yet been given access to my trunks, and I came to the library door at 28 minutes past 5, and I did not knock. I opened the door precisely enough to slip through, and I stood with my back to it inside the room. My husband sat at the desk. Mr. Pell sat opposite him. Between them, on the desk, were 3 ledgers and a single sheet of paper folded in 3. Neither of them had heard me come in. "Assured me," Mr. Pell was saying, in a voice quite different from the damp cloth voice he had used in the hall, a voice with edges, that no provision was to be made until the union was consummated and acknowledged. "I have, Your Grace, the express word of whom, Mr. Pell?" A silence. "You have the express word," the Duke said, very evenly. "Of whom?" Mr. Pell adjusted his cuff. "Of those," he said carefully, "who have served the house of Ravenshold a great many years longer than yourself, Your Grace." The Duke set down his pen. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise anything. "Mr. Pell," he said, "last night, at the Crown Inn at Ravensford, between the hours of 11 and 1, in the presence of my cousin, Captain Hale, and the Reverend Dr. Sims of Ravensford Parish, I executed a deed transferring the unentailed property of Marlow Hill, together with the income therefrom and the jointure attached, into the sole and absolute possession of Miss Linnea Whitcombe, soon to be Duchess of Ravenshold, that transfer to take effect at the moment of solemnisation, which solemnization occurred at 23 minutes past 9 this morning. He paused. You are aware of the deed, Mr. Pell? Mr. Pell had gone the colour of old parchment. Your Grace, I was not informed. You were not informed because I did not inform you. The Duke leaned back. You were not consulted because I did not consult you. The deed was executed, witnessed, sealed, and lodged with my London solicitor by the dawn post. It is registered, Mr. Pell. It is done. Mr. Pell's hand twitched once on the leather of the chair. Your Grace will forgive me if I observe that this is most unusual. It is not unusual at all. It is, in fact, exactly the provision my father made for my mother on the day before their wedding. The paperwork is in this house. I read it again last week. You will find it in the third ledger to your left. Mr. Pell did not look at the third ledger to his left. Mr. Pell, said my husband, look at me. Mr. Pell looked at him. My wife came into this house this afternoon, the Duke said quietly, and was given the east attic. She did not flinch. She thanked the housekeeper for the room. She has not asked me, in the 8 hours we have been married, for anything at all. Not for a gown, not for a maid, not for a single courtesy. Do you understand what that means, Mr. Pell? Mr. Pell did not speak. It means that she does not yet know I have already given her Marlow Hill. And it means that you, Mr. Pell, and whoever you serve, miscalculated. You assumed I would let them keep her small. You assumed I would wait until the household had taken its measure. You assumed I would, like my father before me, hesitate. He leaned forward. I did not hesitate. I was breathing very quietly behind the door. Tomorrow morning, the Duke said, you will resign your post as steward of this estate. You will resign for reasons of health. You will withdraw to your cottage. You will say nothing to anyone of this conversation. If you do these 3 things, I will not pursue what I know about the £870 entered in the second ledger under the heading Contingent Expenses. If you do not, Mr. Pell, I will. A long silence. Your Grace, Mr. Pell whispered. You may go. Mr. Pell stood. He did not look at the door. He did not see me. He walked across the library on legs that seemed to belong to a much older man, and he opened the small side door that led to the servants' passage, and he closed it behind him very gently, as a man does who has just been told that the floor of his life is no longer where he had left it. My husband sat at the desk and looked at the closed door, and then, without turning, he said, Come in properly, Your Grace. I stepped away from the door. He did not look surprised. He had known I was there. I do not know for how long. I do not know how he had known. You should not have heard that, he said. I should not have done a great many things today, I said. My voice was steady. I was rather proud of my voice. I did not flinch in the hall, because I have not been permitted to flinch in 12 years. I did not thank the housekeeper for the room, because I am grateful for the room. I am grateful, Your Grace, for any room. I have lately been sleeping in a corridor with a draught from a broken window. The east attic is, by some considerable margin, the warmest room I have slept in since I was a child. He sat very still. I did not know, I said, about Marlow Hill. No. You ought to have told me. Yes. His voice was very quiet. I ought to have told you. I will tell you now, if you will sit down. I did not sit down. I crossed the room instead, slowly, until I was on the other side of the desk from him, and I put my hand on the back of the chair Mr. Pell had occupied, and I said, "Why did you marry me?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Because I read a letter," he said, "in my father's hand, written to your father 26 years ago, before either of us was born. They had been at Cambridge together. They were friends. My father wrote to your father that if either of them had a son and the other a daughter, and if both children grew to be good, he should be honoured to see them matched. Your father wrote back, agreeing. The letters are in this house. I read them last spring. I made inquiries. I learned where you were. I learned how you were living. I came south." I said nothing. "That is one reason," he said. "And the other?" He looked away then, for the first time. He looked at the fire instead of at me, and his profile in the firelight was the profile of a much younger man than the one I had married. A man not yet 30, a man tired in a way I recognised from the inside. A man who carried a house and a name and a great cold weight of obligation, as if it had been pressed upon him without his consent. "And the other," he said, "is that I have been very alone in this house, Your Grace, since my father died. And I read the letter and I thought, here is a woman who has been treated as I have not had the courage to refuse to be treated. I thought, if she has lived through that, perhaps she will know how to live through this. Perhaps she will not be frightened of me. Perhaps she will not be frightened of them. I thought, perhaps she will see what is happening in this house, because she has had to learn to see." He turned his face back to me. "I thought wrong about most of it," he said. "Forgive me. I did not think wrong about that last. A great house has many ears. I learned this in the first 3 days. The household reorganised itself around me, the way water reorganises around a stone. Some streams parted, some did not. Mrs. Hartwell, on the second morning, brought me up to the master suite. Quietly, Your Grace, by the back stair. The dowager does not yet know. And showed me the rooms my husband had prepared. And I walked through them in silence. And I touched the bedpost of the wide bed, and the embroidery on the window seat, and the small writing desk by the window that overlooked the long avenue of limes. And I said, "Mrs. Hartwell, have my things brought here, but leave a candle burning in the east attic. I shall use that room for letters." She looked at me carefully. "For letters, Your Grace." "For letters," I said. "And anything else I do not wish to be observed doing." She smiled, the first smile she had given me, and she said, "Very good, Your Grace. As you wish." On the third afternoon, in the long gallery, the dowager Lady Cassandra came upon me alone. She was beautiful. I have said this. She was beautiful in a way that demanded a response, and I had decided already to give her none. "You walked into my house," she said, "wearing a grey gown that any milliner's apprentice in Bath could have stitched, and you have not asked for so much as a length of ribbon since." "I have not needed one, my lady." "You will need a great deal more than ribbon, child. There are dinners, there are calls, there is the September ball, there is the bishop. The county is watching you, Duchess. The county will eat you alive." "The county," I said quietly, "is welcome to try." She tilted her head. The January eyes appraised me anew. "He has not told you," she said. "He has told me a great deal." "Has he told you about Miss Westcott?" I did not blink. I had learned, in the houses of my keepers, not to blink at the names of women I had not heard before. He has not yet had occasion to mention a Miss Westcott. Then he has not told you everything, has he, my dear? She smiled, and her smile was not unkind, which made it worse. Sit with me a moment. Let me tell you what kind of house you have walked into. It will save us all a great deal of unpleasantness later. I did not sit. I stood at the window and I watched the limes move in the wind, and I listened to her, and she told me a story. She told me that my husband's late father had been promised to a Miss Westcott of Hertfordshire, that the engagement had been understood, if not formal, for 2 years, that the engagement had been broken on the elder Duke's side in favour of a hastier and quieter match, and that the Westcotts had never forgiven it. She told me that my husband, 6 months ago, had renewed acquaintance with Miss Anne Westcott, the niece of that earlier intended, at a house party in Derbyshire, and that an understanding had been reached, not formal, not signed, but understood. She told me that my arrival, sudden and unannounced, had broken that understanding, that Anne Westcott had wept in this very gallery the day before my wedding, that the Westcotts had not yet been told the wedding had taken place. She told me, in the soft voice of a woman doing me a favour, that my husband had married me to keep the Westcotts from forcing his hand, and that he would, in time, find a way to set me aside. She told me, lastly, that she was telling me this because she had been fond of his mother, and his mother would have wished her son protected from a wife who did not know what she had stepped into. She finished. She waited. I did not turn from the window. "My lady," I said, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course, child. How much is Mr. Pell paying you?" The silence that followed was the most satisfying silence I had ever produced in a room. She did not answer. She rose, she withdrew, very gracefully, and the door closed behind her. I stood at the window until my hands stopped shaking, and then I went and found my husband in the library. I told him what she had told me, all of it, including Miss Anne Westcott. He listened without interrupting. When I had finished, he said only, "Anne Westcott is 15 years old. I have met her twice. She is a child. There has been no understanding." "I know," I said. "You know. Your Aunt Cassandra is a frightened woman doing a frightened woman's work. She does not lie convincingly. She lies the way a person lies who has been told what to say." He looked at me. He looked at me, I think, for the first time since the chapel, and what was in his face was something I had not seen yet in this house. It was not quite a smile, but it was the architecture of one. If you are still with me, if this story has caught you the way it has caught me writing it, would you take a moment now to tap the like? It tells the algorithm to bring this kind of story to more people. I will keep telling them as long as you keep coming back to listen. The September ball was 8 days later. The whole county was invited. The whole county came. I do not now remember the colour of the gown I wore. I remember that my husband, when I came down the great staircase, was standing at the foot of it with his hand on the banister, and that he watched me come down without speaking, and that when I reached the bottom step, he offered me his arm and said, "Your Grace, walk in with me." The great hall was full of people. The musicians were playing. Lady Cassandra stood near the dais with a glass in her hand and a small, fixed smile she had pinned to her mouth 4 hours earlier. Mr. Pell was not present. He had resigned 3 days previous, citing health, and had withdrawn to his cottage. Lord Beverley, my husband's trustee, his father's old friend, the man who had stood at my husband's shoulder at the chapel, and whose name I had not, until tonight, given much thought to, stood near the long windows in a black coat and a white cravat. He was speaking with a young man whose face I did not know. I had been the Duchess of Ravenshold for 13 days. I had not, in those 13 days, been introduced to one person of consequence in this county outside this house. Tonight, I was to be introduced to all of them at once. My husband walked me onto the dais. He did not let go of my hand. He turned to face the room, and he waited until the music stopped and the talk stopped, and the great hall was silent except for the soft hiss of 200 candles. He said, "Friends, neighbours, tenants, this is Linnea, Duchess of Ravenshold. She is my wife. She is the mistress of this house, of this estate, and, I say this so it shall be known tonight and not by rumour later, of the unentailed lands of Marlow Hill, transferred to her sole possession the night before our wedding. I will hear no insult to her under this roof. I will hear no slight. I will hear no whisper. Anyone who has business with my wife will address her directly, in daylight, and to her face. Tonight, in this hall, you may begin." He stepped down from the dais. He stepped down before me. He walked to the bottom of the dais steps, and he turned, and he held up his hand to me, as a man hands a queen down from her carriage. And the great hall, every single person in it, stood and watched him do it. I came down. I took his hand. The hall began, very softly, to applaud. It was not the great roar of a coronation. It was the slow, considered applause of a county deciding, in real time, what it had just been told. It built. It grew. It became, eventually, something that sounded, in the rafters of Ravenshold's great hall, like a thing that had been waiting a long time to be permitted. Lady Cassandra did not applaud. Lord Beverley did, with his gloved hands, very politely, a beat behind the rest of the room. His eyes did not leave me. That, I noticed. I had time, later, to think about it. The dance was a long one. I am told I danced well. I do not remember dancing well. I remember my husband's hand at my waist. At no point did it linger. At no point did it stray. And I remember his eyes on mine, across the figure of the dance. And I remember thinking, with the small, clear clarity I had been learning to trust, he is doing this for me. He hates this. He hates every face in this room. He is doing this because I walked into his house and was given the smallest room, and he is correcting the record in front of every person whose record matters. When the dance ended, he led me to a low chair by the dais. He stood at my shoulder. He did not leave my side for the next 2 hours. It was during those 2 hours that Lord Beverley made his approach. He was a man of perhaps 60, white hair, well kept, a kind face, the kind of face that has been cultivated for kindness over a very great many years. "Your Grace," he said and bowed. "Forgive me, I have not had the pleasure of being properly introduced." "My Lord Beverley," I said, "my husband has spoken of you." "Has he indeed?" His smile was warm. "All good things, I trust?" "He said you were a friend of his father's." "I had that honour, yes." He spoke with me for some quarter of an hour. He was charming. He was, I observed, charming in a precise, attentive, listening sort of way that I have since learned to mistrust on principle. He asked after Marlow Hill. He asked whether I'd visited it yet. He asked whether I intended to. He asked, in a voice quite without inflection, whether I had had occasion to inspect the muniments room. "The muniments room, my lord?" "At Marlow Hill, the family papers, old deeds and so on. Ravenhold's archives were moved there for safekeeping during the late war. I had occasion, Your Grace, to assist in their cataloguing." He smiled. "It was a great undertaking. I should be most happy to assist Your Grace if you ever wish to consult them. The room is, somewhat disordered." "You are very kind, my lord." "It is nothing, Your Grace. Nothing at all." He bowed. He withdrew. My husband, who had heard every word, said nothing. He waited a long moment. He waited until Lord Beverley was out of earshot. Then he said, very quietly, against my ear, "He has never offered to assist me with the muniments room." I turned my head slightly. "He has been the trustee of those papers," he said, "since I was 9 years old." I drew breath very carefully. "My husband," I said, "I think I should like to ride to Marlow Hill tomorrow." "At dawn," he said. "We shall go together. Bring Hartwell, bring Hale, bring anyone whose loyalty you do not doubt." I nodded. I could feel, as a person feels the change of weather in an old wound, that something had just shifted in this house. Something we had thought half resolved had only changed costume. We rode at dawn. The sky was the colour of pewter. The road to Marlow Hill ran 6 miles north through low fields and over a stone bridge and along the edge of a wood. I had not been on a horse since I was 13. My husband had had a very gentle grey mare saddled for me, and he rode beside me at a walk, and we did not speak for most of the way. Captain Hale rode ahead. Mrs. Hartwell came in the trap behind. Marlow Hill was small. It was a modest stone house on a rise, with a walled garden gone to seed, and a yew hedge that had not been clipped in some years. The keeper, a thin, elderly man named Mr. Doone, came out to meet us. He stopped halfway across the gravel when he saw me. "Your Grace," he said. "Mr. Doone," said my husband, "the Duchess wishes to see the muniments room." The thin, elderly man looked at me, and then at my husband, and his face did a thing that faces do when a long-held secret encounters the first hand that has reached for it. "I am very glad," he said quietly. "Your Graces are come." He led us through the house. He led us down a long passage and through a low door, and down 4 stone steps into a small, whitewashed room with a single high window, and 3 deal cabinets and a long deal table. On the table, neatly laid out, was a sheaf of papers tied with red ribbon and a small, leather-bound volume. "His Lordship," said Mr. Doone, "came 2 days before your Grace's wedding. He came alone. He spent 4 hours in this room. He took nothing away, your Grace. But he disturbed every paper in those cabinets, and he left this, on the table for any person to see, as if to say, 'I have looked, and I have left it where I left it, and you will know I have looked.'" He looked at my husband. "I have not touched it since. I have locked the door. I have given the key to no one. I have not spoken of it. I waited, your Grace, because his lordship has been very kind to me these 20 years, and I could not at first believe what I was seeing. I waited until you should come." My husband moved very slowly to the table. He picked up the small leather-bound volume. He opened it. He read for perhaps a minute. When he looked up, his face had gone the colour of bone. "Linnea," he said. He had not used my name before, not once. Not in our wedding vows, not in the carriage, not in the library, not on the dance floor. He used it now. "Linnea," he said again, "this is my father's hand. This is a memorandum he wrote 3 weeks before he died. It states that the unentailed property of Marlow Hill was not, in fact, ever unentailed. That my grandfather entailed it secretly in 1788 by a separate deed onto a cadet branch of the family, a branch my father did not know existed until that year, a branch that surfaces by way of a marriage in 1762 he had been led his whole life to believe had not produced issue." He looked at me. "My father wrote that he had located that issue, that she was alive, that she was 22 years old, that her name was Linnea Whitcombe of Bath." The room was very quiet. "My darling," he said, very softly. "Marlow Hill was already yours. By blood, by patent, by the entail my grandfather hid for 58 years. My father knew. My father was murdered 3 weeks after he wrote this memorandum. And the man who came into this room 2 days before our wedding and read these papers and left them on the table to taunt me is the man who held the trusteeship of my father's affairs for the 22 years between my grandfather's death and tonight." He set the volume down. "Beverley," he said. He turned to Captain Hale, who had come to the doorway. "Edmund," he said, "take Mrs. Hartwell back at once. Lock the Duchess in the master suite with 2 footmen at the door. Send for the magistrate. Send a fast rider south to my London solicitor. I am going to ride straight at Beverley before he understands what he has just put into our hands." He turned to me. "Stay alive," he said. He kissed me. Once. On the forehead, not the mouth. It was the first time he had touched me in any way at all since the wedding morning. He rode out of the gates of Marlow Hill at the gallop. I stood in the small whitewashed room with my hand on the leather volume of my father-in-law's handwriting, and I thought, very clearly, with the strange clarity that has been mine these last weeks. He has gone alone. He has gone alone. And Beverley has been waiting 22 years for this exact ride. If you have come this far, if this story has its claws in you, would you do me one small kindness now? Drop a comment below telling me where you were listening from tonight. I read every one. They keep me writing into the small hours. Now, back to it. He did not return that evening. He did not return at first light. Captain Hale came up to the master suite at 6 in the morning with his hat in his hand and a face I have not since been able to forget. "Your Grace." "Edmund. His Grace is taken. He is held at Beverley Court. The charge is... I cannot speak it without... The charge is forgery, Your Grace. They claim he forged the deed of Marlow Hill the night before the wedding. They have a witness. They claim, a confession from..." He could not say it for a moment. "From Mr. Pell, given 2 days before he resigned. Lord Beverley has invoked his rights as senior trustee to hold his Grace under house arrest pending an inquiry of the Lord Chancellor. Your Grace, the writ is real. The seals are real. I have seen them." I sat down on the edge of the great bed in the great room my husband had had warmed for me a fortnight before he rode south. I did not weep. I had decided this on my wedding day. I had not changed my mind. "Edmund," I said, "bring me the leather volume from the muniments room. Bring me the deed of Marlow Hill. Bring me the keeper, Mr. Doone. Bring me Mrs. Hartwell. Bring me ink, paper, and the household seal. Bring me a horse. Your Grace, bring me a horse, Captain Hale. I am not the woman they think I am. I have not been the woman they thought I was since I walked into this house. Lord Beverley has held my husband's family papers for 22 years. I have held them for 1 afternoon. He has the law. I have the truth. I should prefer to ride toward Beverley Court with both." He looked at me. He did not speak. He bowed, and he went. I rode to Beverley Court with Captain Hale at my right hand and Mr. Doone in the trap behind, and a leather satchel across my saddle containing the memorandum of my husband's late father, the entail of 1788, the deed of Marlow Hill, the original letters between our 2 fathers, and a written statement from Mr. Doone, signed in his own hand, regarding what Lord Beverley had done in the muniments room 2 days before my wedding. I rode through the gates of Beverley Court at 20 minutes past 11 in the morning. I did not dismount. I did not announce myself. I rode the grey mare directly up the gravel sweep to the front steps, and I sat the horse, and I waited. Lord Beverley came out himself. He had been waiting for me. He had not been waiting for me to come on horseback. "Your Grace," he said, "this is most irregular." "My Lord Beverley, where is my husband?" "Your husband is detained on suspicion of—" "Where is my husband, my lord?" He looked at me. I looked at him. I had spent 12 years being looked at by people who did not see me. I had learned how to be seen on my own terms. "In the morning room," he said at last, "under guard. I cannot, Your Grace, in the present circumstances, release him to you. The writ, I said, is invalid." I held up the satchel. "The deed of Marlow Hill," I said, "is not in my husband's hand. It is countersigned by Reverend Dr. Sims of Ravensford Parish and Captain Edmund Hale of Ravenshold. It is registered with the Lord Chancellor's office by the dawn post of the day of our wedding. It cannot have been forged the night before the wedding, because it was lodged by sunrise that same morning. In London, by a rider you yourself, my lord, dispatched. I have his receipt. Captain Hale obtained it this morning. The rider, when shown the writ against my husband, asked at once to give evidence. He has given it. It is here." His face did not change. "Further," I said, "the deed is not material to the question of Marlow Hill, because Marlow Hill is not in my husband's gift, and was not on the night before our wedding. Marlow Hill is, by an entail executed in 1788 by the late Duke, settled upon the issue of a marriage at Whitcombe in 1762. I am that issue. I am, my lord, the only issue. The entail was concealed in the muniments room at Marlow Hill for 58 years by the trustee of the estate. That trustee, my lord, is yourself. My husband's late father discovered the concealment 3 weeks before his death. He left a memorandum in his own hand. I have it here. It names you." He had gone very still. "Lord Beverley," I said, "I am 6 miles from my house. I am 22 years old. I have been the Duchess of Ravenshold for 15 days. I am the granddaughter, by a marriage you have spent your career denying, of a man whose papers you have held in trust since before I was born. I have ridden here this morning because my husband is in a room behind you, and because if you do not produce him to me, on the steps of this house, within the next quarter of an hour, I shall ride from here directly to the magistrate at Ravensford, who is also the bishop's cousin, with the satchel that is in my hand. The contents of this satchel, my lord, will destroy your house, not by my voice, by the simple, plain reading of your own predecessor's hand." I sat the horse. "Produce my husband, my lord." A wind moved across the gravel sweep. I did not move. I did not blink. I had learned, in 12 years of being told to be small, exactly how still a person could be. Lord Beverley turned his head once, to the footman at the door, and he said, "Bring his Grace down, at once." The curse, though it had not been called a curse, though no one in this story had ever named it such, broke not in a flash of light, but in the slow walking out of a man through a doorway. My husband came down the steps of Beverley Court in his shirt sleeves, his coat folded over his arm, his hair disordered, a thin cut at his cheekbone where someone had struck him with a ring. He saw me on the horse. He did not run. He walked with what I now know was the deliberate, controlled walk of a man who has been very near to despair within the last hour, and is choosing, in front of everyone, not to break into a run. He came to the side of the grey mare. He put his hand on my knee, through the skirt of my habit, and he held it there. "Your Grace," he said. "Your Grace," I said. The cost of breaking what had been laid on this house was written, then, on my hands. I had not noticed until that moment that I had been gripping the satchel so hard that the leather had cut through the palm of my glove. Blood had soaked through the kid. I had not felt it. I felt it now, the bruise of it, the dull ache of a thing that has been held too tight, too long, by a body that had not been permitted to admit how much it was carrying. I held the satchel out to him. "It is all in here," I said. "Everything. Every paper, every name, every date. He cannot deny one of them." He took the satchel. He looked up at me. His eyes, in the grey light of that morning at Beverley Court, were not the eyes of the cold, even man I had married. They were the eyes of a man who had spent his entire life being lied to, in his own house, by people he had been told to trust, and who had just been told the truth, on horseback, by a wife of 15 days, with her own blood on her glove. "Come down," he said quietly. "Let me carry you. You are shaking." "I am not shaking, Your Grace." "You are. I can see it. Come down." I came down. He did not embrace me. We were on the gravel of another man's house. He took my hand, the bleeding hand, and he turned it palm up, and he looked at it. He did not speak. He took his own handkerchief from his coat, and he bound my palm with a precise, careful, almost surgical care that I have not since forgotten. "You came alone," he said. "I did not come alone. I brought the truth." He looked at me for a long moment. "Linnea," he said. "Alaric," I answered. It was the first time I had spoken his name. It was the first time, I think, anyone in the great house of Ravenshold had spoken his name to him in love. He closed his eyes once and opened them again, and I saw the man in there. Just the man. Not the duke, not the title, not the cold inheritance. The young man in his shirt sleeves on the gravel of another man's house, kept alive by a wife he had given everything to before he had even told her her name. "I love you," he said. "I know," I said. "You told me on a Tuesday in Bath 3 weeks ago, in my second cousin's parlour. I did not know you had said it then. I know now." He laughed. It was a very small laugh. It was the first laugh I had ever heard from him. It sounded like a hinge moving for the first time in a long while. He kissed me then. Once. On the mouth. Briefly, in the cold air, on the gravel, in front of his cousin and the magistrate's rider and Mr. Doone and Mrs. Hartwell and Lord Beverley standing on the top step with his face the colour of old wax. Something inside me, which I had been keeping very small for 12 years, finally took its first full breath. 3 months later, the gardens at Ravenshold were doing what gardens do in late autumn, which is to say, they were not so much in bloom as in considered preparation for the year to come. The bare arches of the rose walks, the early frost on the gravel, the smell of wood smoke from the village. Lord Beverley had been impeached before the Lords. His role as trustee had been struck from the record. The cadet branch, me, had been confirmed in possession of Marlow Hill and of the small barony attached to it, by separate creation that no one had known of. Mr. Pell had turned King's evidence in exchange for transportation rather than the rope. Lady Cassandra had retired to a small property in the Lake District, from which she wrote, at regular intervals, the same letter, in increasingly disordered handwriting, asking to be received at Ravenshold for Christmas. She would not be received. She would, my husband had decided, be quietly maintained. The Council of Trustees of Ravenshold, dissolved by Act of the Lords, had been replaced by a new arrangement, of which my husband and I were the two named principals. I had had the east attic kept. I had had the writing desk dusted, and the candle replaced, and the small high window cleaned. I went up there every morning before the household stirred, and I wrote letters in my own hand to women in my position who had been less lucky. Companions in damp parlours, governesses in cold houses. And I signed them Linnea, Duchess of Ravenshold, and I sent them out by the morning post. A letter came back, in the 3rd month, from Mrs. Pelham of Bath. She wrote that she had read in the papers of my new estate. She wrote that she had always known I had been a quiet sort of girl, with hidden depths. She wrote that she had never been other than kind to me. She wrote that she hoped, in time, to be received in some small way at Ravenshold for the Christmas season. She wrote that she had, perhaps, been firmer than she ought, but only for my own good. She wrote, in the last line, that I had always been like a daughter to her. I read this letter, in the east attic, at 6:30 on a frost-bright morning, with the household not yet awake. I did not weep. I had decided this in the chapel. I had not changed my mind in 3 months. I dipped my pen. I wrote her, in my own hand, a single line. Mrs. Pelham, I received your letter. I shall not be at home for Christmas. Linnea, Duchess of Ravenshold, of Marlow Hill, of the small barony of Whitcombe by separate creation. I sealed it. I sent it. I sat at the small desk in the east attic for some minutes afterwards. The door opened behind me. My husband stood in the doorway with 2 cups of chocolate. He was in his dressing gown. His hair was untidy. He looked, in the cold autumn light, like a man who had slept well, which he had not done, he had told me, for some 6 or 7 years before he married me. You are up early, Your Grace, he said. I am writing letters, Your Grace. To whom, on this particular morning? To a woman who once asked me, I said, what kind of room she might be given at Ravenshold for Christmas. I have replied to her. He set down the cups. He came and stood behind my chair. He looked at the letter on the desk. He read it. He laughed. It was, I noticed with the small, clear pleasure that has been mine since the morning at Beverley Court, his second laugh. The hinge was loosening. It would loosen, I hoped, a great deal more over the years. You are, he said, a terrifying woman, Your Grace. I have had a great deal of practice, I said, at being underestimated, Your Grace. He bent down. He kissed the top of my head. Come down to breakfast when you are ready, he said. There are no obligations today. We are entirely our own. He withdrew. I sat a little longer in the east attic, in the smallest room in Ravenshold, which I had kept, and which I would keep, and which I would, in time, leave to a daughter, if there was a daughter. With the same instruction my husband had once given his housekeeper, make it warm. She has been cold a long while. I picked up my cup. I went downstairs. If you have stayed with me to the end of this story, if it has touched you or surprised you or held you the way it has held me, would you do me the small grace of telling me below, was there a moment in this story that made you gasp? I read every comment, and I am writing the next one as we speak. Subscribe if you have not already, and I will be back soon with another. Until then, be careful what room they give you, and keep the candle burning in case you need to write your way out.